So there's these vocabulary words on it. They're not really vocabulary words, but they are words that you should know when you see them or when you say them, what is actually being referred to. The word halves means what fraction? 1/2. The word thirds then means 1/3. And if I said 2/3, then that would mean that I have 2 times 1/3, which is 2 over 3, 2/3. Fourths is 1/4. And fifths, 1 over 5, 6, eighths, 1 over 8, ninths, 1 over 9, and tenths. 1 over 10. Pretty straightforward, right? Okay, the challenging part is the decimal for some of these. Now, some of them you definitely know already, but some of them you probably don't remember off the top of your head, and I'm telling you that it is going to be much simpler to deal with these numbers if you know how to switch between the two. So what is the decimal version of 1/2? 0.5. Include the 0 out front. When I was sitting in your chairs, or when I was taking Algebra 1, I didn't, and it led to mistakes. You know why? If I had a problem like this, 3 times 0.5, I might not see that times right there and just think I have 3.5. Those are the kind of mistakes I was making. So don't do that. Include the 0, and then it's obvious. 3 times 0.5. All right? How about thirds? What is the decimal for thirds? 0.3 repeating. And the symbol for repeating is a bar over the top, or you could write 0.3 ... That also means repeating. You'll see me write the bar. How about fourths? What's the decimal for fourths? 0.25. How about fifths? 0.2. Not repeating, it's just 0.2. Like 20 cents. Right? If you have 20 cents times 5, you get $1. How about eighths? This is probably the one that people don't remember the most, but this is the one that you do need to remember the most. Anybody remember that one without looking at a calculator? It's close. What is it? No, eighths is 0.125. If you think about it, an eighth is half of a fourth. So if a fourth is 0.25, then half of that would be an eighth. Half of 0.25, half of 25 is 12.5. So half of 0.25 should be 0.125. All right? Hopefully you followed that logic. What about ninths? 0. Control Enter does it. 0.1 repeating. That's right. And tenths? 0.1. If I were to read 0.1, what would I say? 1/10. Yeah. So this one's kind of a weird one because you say 1/10 here and you say 1/10 here also. Most of the time when you see that decimal. You could say 0.1, but a lot of times people will say 1/10. So that's the idea. Those are the key ones that you need to know. You should have those automatically in your mind. If somebody says 1/8, you think 1 over 8, or you think 0.125. All right, this table has all of those words that we just worked with. It also has this column across the top. This N with the arrow stands for numerator. So the numerator is going to be these guys. The denominator will be coming from these words. And you're going to construct the fractions and the decimals. So what I recommend you do is divide each one of these boxes like so. So draw all these lines in there so that on one side, on the left side of each box, you can write the fraction. On the other side of the box, you can write the decimal. All right, so what I want you to do, we can kind of talk about halves and then I'll do another one somewhere along the way. Put the fraction on the left side. So halves we said was something divided by 2. We have a 1 in the numerator column right here, so I'm going to put the 1 over 2. And then over here, still halves, but now the numerator is a 2, so I'm going to put 2 over 2. And earlier we said the decimal version of 1/2 was what? 0.5. What is the decimal version of 2 over 2? Yeah, it's just 1, so we're going to put 1. That reduces down to 1. And let's also do, let's go with fourths. So we have on this one something divided by 4. The numerator will be 1. And you can go ahead and do all the fractions right away and then work on the decimals after that. So the next one over would be what divided by 4? 2, and then 3, and then 4 divided by 4. Okay, so now let's go through and do the decimals. We said 1/4 as a decimal was what? 0.25. What is 2/4 as a decimal? Think about it in terms of money. 0.5. You'll hear me go to money a lot when we're working with fractions or decimals. How about 3/4? Yeah, what's another way I could read 3/4? 3/4. And if you have 3/4 in money, how much money do you have? 75 cents. And you would write that as $0.75. And 4/4 is $1 if we're talking about money. 4/4 is just 1. Okay, so let's copy over what we wrote down from the previous page. We have thirds is 1/3, fourths is 1/4, fifths is 1/5, eighths is 1/8, ninths is 1/9, tenths is 1/10, and we also have the decimal version of each of those. 0.3 repeating, 0.2 for 1/5, 0.125 for 1/8, 0.1 repeating for 1/9, and for 1/10 we have just 0.1 not repeating. Go ahead and fill in the rest of this table. All right, let's talk about these. Let's do thirds, fractions first. What do we have next? Fractions first. So let's read it so it sounds like we know how to read it. That would be 2/3, and then finally 3/3. Okay, fourths we already did. Fifths, which is 2/5, and then 3/5, 4/5, 5/5. Okay, and eighths. 2/8. Good. Nice. And ninths. Okay. Good. And tenths. And does it bother anybody that we don't have a 10/10 here? Yeah, it usually does. A lot of people will add that box on there. You don't have to. I think by that point we'll understand what 10/10 probably is. Okay. All right, let's go through and do the decimals now. Let's go back to thirds. If 1/3 is 0.3 repeating, then 2/3 will be 0.6 repeating. And 3/3 would be 1. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Fourths, we already did. Fifths, yes, 0.4. So let's talk about this one for a second. If I have 1/5 is 0.2, then 2 of these would be 2/5. 2.2s is 0.4. 3.2s would be 0.6, and 4/5 would be 0.8, and 5/5 is 1. Do you see the pattern? It's going up by 0.2 each time, okay? How about eighths? This is probably the toughest one. .25. Next. I hear a 375, and that's correct. All we're doing is adding 0.125 each time. 0.125 plus 0.125 is 0.25. 0.25 plus 0.125, 25 plus 12 is 37, 37, and then I have an extra 5 on there, 0.375. How about 4/8? 0.5, 5/8. Very good. 0.625. 6/8. 0.75. 7/8. 0.875, and 8/8 is 1. We'll come back to eighths here in a little bit. Ninths. 0.2 repeating. 3/9. Good? But the pattern tells me it should be what? 0.9 repeating. So if I have 0.9 repeating forever, eventually I'm going to have to stop and round, right? And when I round, it'll turn everything over to zeros, carry the 1, and it does give me the 1. Technically, following the pattern, you could say that 9/9 is 0.9 repeating. 0.9 repeating is 1. And tenths, probably the easiest one we have up here. 0.2, good. Okay, I want to talk about a few of these. First of all, let's notice the difference between ninths and tenths. How are they the same? How are they different? Let's talk about same first. How are they the same? Look. Yeah, we wrote down exactly the same numbers for the decimal. How are they different? So do you think maybe it's kind of important that I say that 5/9 is 0.5 repeating compared to 5/10, which is 0.5 exactly? Yeah, there's a big difference between these two numbers. They look very similar. But on the ninths, you have to remember that these are repeating, okay? 0.3 repeating is a lot different than 0.3 done. All right? Totally different number. Let's also talk about eighths. Have you seen this somewhere else? Where? The fourths. Right here. 0.25 shows up for 1/4, and it also shows up for 2/8. Why? Because 2/8 reduces down to 1/4. That's right. So even though I have 2/8 sitting here, the decimal version of 2/8 is the same as the decimal version of 1/4 because they are the exact same fraction. Same with 4/8 and 2/4 and 1/2. They are all exactly the same fraction. Look at 6/9. 0.6 repeating, same as 2/3. 0.6 repeating, 6/9 reduces to 2/3. They are the same fraction. So that's why we reduce. We always reduce down to the lowest possible fraction, and then we can work with that decimal if we want to. This one right here, eighths, is probably the one that you're most uncomfortable with, and it's probably the one that you need to be the most comfortable with. Eighths comes up a lot. 5/8, 0.625. You should know that off the top of your head. 7/8, 0.875. It comes up all the time. So that's the one I want you to focus on. You need to know that one. The rest of these are fairly easy. Halves you got, thirds you got, fourths think about quarters and dollars. Fifths, 0.2. If you can remember 0.2, you can get the rest of them pretty quick. There is a pattern to each of these. Ninths and tenths, same numbers. Ninths, it's repeating. Tenths, it's not. Eighths is the only oddball in there. That's the one that you need to really work on. So get it down.